Bastien, thanks for letting us be here at your amazing Foley studio. This is an incredible place.
Thank you. No, I'm very glad to host and to discuss with you about this kind of secretive but wonderful world of Foley.
How long have you been in this place?
It's going to be starting the 5th year soon.
Oh, wow. That's great. You've got a control room, which is in 5-1. You've got this cool waiting area out here, and then you've got a studio over there. How long did it take you to build this?
I would think like of course, it's always an ongoing process with always upgrades and little tweaks to be done. But overall, the whole construction process lasted about 1.5 years.
I tell people on Cinema Sound when they ask me, what's Foley? What is that? I say, well, Foley is pretty much any sound that a human body or a human makes on camera. What else is that?
So, I mean, the definition of Foley to me is it's always a little of a blurry line. What mostly defines the spectrum is going to be, as always, the time and budget. But I like to call it as customly recorded sound effects. So, you know, it can go, of course, like you mentioned, to all sounds that are related to the actor, every object that is going to interact with. But it could also go further down with things like, you know, car impacts, explosions, debris, all kind of things, which basically, the frontier is really defined by what the sound supervisor is going to request, and of course also with the resources that are available for the project.
And you're super creative, because when you did some Foley for us on Outpost, there's a scene where our hero's robot got stabbed, and there's this part of the alien on the ground, and we never saw it. Now, they spent a lot of money on visual effects. This little thing that was just going like this, pulsing.
Right, the little slimy
Yeah,
thing.
the little slimy whatever. And we didn't see it until you put that in. But that wasn't a human. That was just something that you saw.
Right, exactly. So which once again shows where the frontier, the barrier is a little blurry there. But yeah, pretty much Foley is all about what's going to help you feel into the scene as much as possible. Like I like to say, basically I've done a great job if nobody noticed that I've added anything there, but it just feels like it should be there.
On Cinema Sound, we have a lot of filmmakers that are trying to figure out how to make it in the business, how to use their talents. And a lot of people see Foley as, wow, that looks like so much fun. That looks like you get dirty all day. How great is that? Is it really fun, or is it hard work, or is it yay or no, or how do you feel?
I mean, I would think that you have to be very passionate about it because it's hard. Like you mentioned, it pushes you to be constantly, in a very dusty environment. It's also physically pretty draining, depending on the projects. And it requires a lot of different skills, meaning performing to start with, but also understanding acoustics. So you are able to pick the right mic and the right positioning in order to reach the desired results. One of the greatest Foley artists around, John Rush, once said, and he always sticked with me, there is more astronauts than working Foley artists.
But here, I mean, this is no less of a studio than anybody who was doing small re-recording mixings for television, or certainly sound effects. I mean, you've got racks of gear, a Pro Tools system, you've got multiple monitors, a 5.1 system, you've got everything in here. It's not just you're doing Foley in a closet, you've got a serious situation, right?
Right, no, definitely. I mean, in order to accommodate, like try to reach the best possible result, of course, you need to have all this array of gear and of course, a properly designed environment. So you're sure that what you hear is what other people are going to hear. So yeah, it's very important to be in a very well-designed acoustical space.
Yeah. What's the most important pieces of gear if somebody wanted to start for their own productions?
I would think, like, of course, the microphone and mic preamp are really important, because with Foley, you're going to have to record things that are extremely subtle. So you have to, of course, choose the right microphone preamp that's going to give you enough clean signal that you can drive the gain pretty high and not get tons of background noise. Exactly.
And internal hiss.
So for an entry-level microphone, I would recommend, like, I think the Rode NT3 and NTG3 shotgun is a pretty good choice. One of the old industry standard was the Sennheiser 416, which I have to be honest, I like and dislike. I think it's a great legacy mic. It's like a little bit like the SM57, which is a go-to mic, and it's just gonna work. But I think nowadays, especially the NTG3 is kind of a more modern version of the 416. So I think for the price, it's an excellent choice. Any mic pre that you can find that has a very clean gain stage.
Like what?
Like, for example, well, ideally a sound device would work. Even a Zoom F8, could work in some ways. There is also, I believe it's a Blue microphone that make the Ruby mic pre. That is also an excellent choice for that. It's pretty decently priced, and yeah, I've used them and we're very happy with the results. So,
how did you get started?
How do I get started? That's actually pretty much by total random of a series of things. I moved from France 10 years ago now to work in audio post-production, mainly doing voiceover recording for Japanese animation. At some point, the studio I was working for closed down. So I found this another job at a different studio, and they asked me one day, "Hey, can you record Foley for us?" I had never heard the word before. I say, sure. So I just run back home, tried to learn as much as I could about what Foley was about. Showed up the next day at the session. I was actually mixing the Foley for Foley artists. Apparently, I didn't do too much of a terrible job. They kept calling me. I kept learning more and more, and I kept liking it more and more. And that's kind of how I fell into it. And since then, I've been just mainly doing this as a main activity.
So at Cinema Sound, we're dedicated to making sure filmmakers get that Hollywood edge. Well, part of getting that is, in sound at least, is making sure you've got all the stuff that your team needs. You're a Foley designer, master Foley designer, Foley artist. What would you like to see when a filmmaker sends you their movie?
So I think, like you were bringing up a very important point. Communication is key to start with. It's very important to get as clear a picture as possible of what the directors envision in the end. Because obviously, in the post-production process, it's a lot of different people working in parallel, and you rarely do get to see everything put together. So it's very important to have a clear picture, so you're sure that then when everything is mixed together, all works harmoniously together. So I think like one of the most crucial thing to get from the filmmaker is to give you a precise direction of exactly how he wants the person sitting in front of the screen to feel. Of course, like we'll never say enough how important it is to get good production sound. Although as good as production sound is, it will be just focused mainly on dialogue. So that Foley will have to be pretty much done from scratch in any case.
Unless there's a sound recorder that's smart enough and has the forethought and the team enough to put microphones down on the feet while the actors are walking, and then you have to be super quiet because then there's camera noise and ADs walking around with belts in their hammers in their belts.
Never happens.
Never. Yeah.
Unfortunately.
No one's ever walking on set.
Right.
So, but that never happens. And the microphones that they're using for dialogue are not necessarily the ones for getting the clothing noise.
Exactly. Like you say, like to be sure that no microphone is shown on screen. And also the fact that sometimes what you see is not what you need to record necessarily.
Like what?
For example, footsteps. There is, if you would really record footsteps on set, it's nearly impossible that it would sound good. Because I think through the years, our ears have been trained to hear things in a certain way. Perfect example, gun movements. A real gun would never make any sound
in fact,
when you move it.
We did this in Cinema Sound where like you shake a gun, and if it's a good gun, it better not make a lot of noise.
No, don't shoot it.
Yeah, right. You're gonna lose something.
But yeah, so that's like one of the example, or footsteps on grass. Like for example, if you would in real life, footsteps on grass don't really sound much like anything. But in Foley, we've been trained to hear footsteps in grass, which we use the traditional magnetic tape for it. And yeah, so this is all things that obviously you don't want to have actors working on magnetic tape on film. So it has any way to be redone. So we're sure that everything is recorded in a controlled environment and mic'd on the most optimal way to get the sound you want.
So what do you want to see from a filmmaker, like as far as deliverables to you?
Usually, it's mainly gonna be, of course, the final cut. This is very important to not start as much as possible before the timing of everything is locked, especially when it comes to Foley, because footsteps, if a scene end up being recut shorter or a few shots got switched, of course, all the footsteps performing is going to be really hard to reconform. So you would have pretty much to redo it from scratch. So yeah, lock cut would be the most important thing. Then most of the time, it's good to have some basic spotting session, at least, to get a sense if there is anything that needs to be that is a requirement in a very specific way, especially when it comes to things that are not obvious. If there is any off-camera action that needs to be added, like let's say you really want to hear people walking in the apartment above, that's something that might not be obvious and that is always good to get from the director. So we're sure to add it to the list of cues to record.
Do they need any special dialogue tracks? You just need a QuickTime movie and
right. I would say like a QuickTime movie plus a dialogue track, of course. And of course, this is rare, but if there is any work that's been done already in sound effects or backgrounds, even if it's temporary, it always helps.
Do you have any great stories or horror stories that you've worked on in production or working with filmmakers? Or what should our folks know?
I think like in terms of the horror story, not really such an horror story, but one thing that I notice is a lot of filmmakers tend to dislike Foley for the simple reason is that they never heard good Foley. And it's true that if it's not done right, it can be pretty horrible.
What makes it done right?
What makes it done right is, first of all, would be the performance. I think it's really important to have a performance that really works with the picture. It's very similar to music in this aspect that, if you don't get to start with good material, it's going to be really hard to make it sound great. You might be able to fix and slice and EQ and all that, but in the end, it's going to sound either very sterile or you're not going to believe it. It's going to just feel like it's just sitting on top of the picture, and basically you'll notice that it's Foley. Same as with bad ADR, where you would properly done ADR would blend perfectly, but poorly done ADR is kind of hard to watch. I think it's important for them to know that Foley is really what, in my opinion, brings a movie to life. Of course, you have all the sound design, the music, the dialogue, and Foley is here to act kind of as a glue. It helps to glue everything together. And really, really makes it realistic. It gives that unity to the project, especially, with subtle sounds like a cloth pass, which you might think, yeah, we don't really need cloth movements there. But even if it's mixed at a level that you would barely notice or not notice at all, it adds to it a lot and to the realism of the scene.
But it's not a Hollywood movie until you're on the re-recording session and they pull up the Foley bus.
Right.
And then you're like, wow, it's like we're really there. And if you're using on-set sound or natural sound, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, it's always missing that extra level of detail that Foley allows to bring there, and for dramatic effect as well. Sometimes someone scratching his face you might want to make that very obvious in the mix, just to push how, the person is under pressure, or even footsteps. Sometimes, you want to make sure that someone is going to sound bigger than life to add to the drama if it's the bad guy, for example. So yeah, all those things, Foley give you the ability to manipulate the reality in a way that enhance the story as much as possible.
Have you had people come to you and say, oh my gosh, we need Foley on this documentary or anything like this?
Yeah, I mean, as much as, of course, I always try to make customers understand that it's always easier to do a full M&E coverage from the start. It's not that much extra cost usually, because once you're into the movie, it just makes more sense to cover everything, even if in the domestic mix you end up not using all of it. But at least it's there. And yeah, I know that sometimes, especially nowadays with the explosion of the indie market, it's been, very important to educate people in regard to those things that they are not always aware of. And the importance of having a M&E as a deliverable.
So you bring up a really great point. With the explosion of the independent market, I would have thought, like in so many other aspects of post-production, all these people are needing to be trained, to be brought up, like in music, like in re-recording, like certainly visual effects and editing and all the color. I mean, we're seeing so many newcomers to the market because of this explosion. But I don't see any great Foley people showing up. What's happening?
First of all, there is not many Foley people to start with.
But there's all this media that needs it now.
Right. And it's true that I have to be honest, like it's one of the weaknesses of a lot of projects that I get to see. And like you say, it needs that Hollywood magic. Even if it's an indie movie, all this reinforcement, especially if the production sound is not great to start with, that's really what's gonna help to give a lot of value to the project. And it's a pretty expensive process as well in general, just because it's one of those things that require really an infrastructure to be able to deliver. It's not just about having a laptop like you would do for video editing, for example. The investment, you can cut a movie with your laptop. You can't record Foley without a perfectly soundproofed environment, a lot of very expensive equipment, and also the artistry of knowing how to do it, being walking footsteps, or being able also to decompose everything you have to record into simpler elements. Let's say, you have a catapult to record. Obviously, I'm not going to buy a catapult and record it. It's kind of hard. Yeah, sure.
I'm sure the police would love that. We're just going to fire this.
So, you have to kind of deconstruct. Let's say, okay, so the catapult, what do we need? We need the wheels creaking. We need the movement of the mechanism. We need the rope stress.
The rock.
We need the rock, the whoosh when the arm goes up. So it's actually, what I love about it is that it forces you to really analyze and decompose everything in more simpler elements that then are easy to perform on the stage with the variety of props that are available.
If I were a filmmaker and I was making my own YouTube movies, I had no money, and there's no way I could, I mean, I'd love to call you, but I can't possibly afford you, even though you're very affordable. I couldn't afford you. What would you tell me to do if I could make a little space in my very quiet closet and I needed to do Foley? What would you suggest?
I mean, of course, the key thing, like we mentioned earlier, would be a microphone and mic pre that would be able to handle very subtle things. Environment-wise, it would be preferable to try to have as much as a dead sounding space as possible. In this case, I would say go for something without any reverb at all. So
like a nice closet that had a lot of clothes that you can move in.
Right, exactly. And the key there is also to make sure that it doesn't, that it's reverb free, but that doesn't muffle the sound too much. So that's the tricky balance to find, to not lose all the presence of the sound. But worst case scenario, I would definitely go for something absolutely reverb free. It's always easier for the mixer to then apply any reverb processing than having to deal with some, especially for outdoor Foley, if you get that room reverb in there, it's not going to work. Yeah. I think one very important thing to consider is, surround yourself with a decent collection of props that would cover. That you can do. Basically, the first step would be to do a spotting session, kind of, get a sense of everything that you're going to need, and then gather the objects, try to listen to the objects, try to study, see which object is going to be the right one for the job. Shoes, obviously for all the footsteps, it's very important to pick the right shoes. If you end up recording and then having to recut every single footsteps, it's going to be very time consuming and you're going to lose the natural of it. I would say just try to get a very good timing. Practice also a technique that is called heel toe, which the thing is, obviously, when actors walk in the studio, you have to stay stationary. So the timing in between your heel and your toe going down is what's going to give you the movement. So the faster, the closer the heel and the toe are going to be together, the faster the movement is going to be. Exactly. Exactly. So that's something that is a little unnatural to do in the first place, so it takes quite some practice to get it right. But it's pretty easy to practice, obviously,
over the course of a feature length.
Exactly. One last thing that I always recommend is sounds needs to be larger than life. It's really important to record things bigger than they should sound, because Foley is going to be played very low in the mix. And if you don't get any exaggerated body to the sounds, when you mix them down, it's going to sound extremely thin, and you're going to lose all the character of the sounds. So it's kind of important to, first of all, monitor at various levels So, you can record and monitor pretty loud to hear how it sounds, but then it's also very important to check it at a much lower level and see if it still sounds okay. So yeah, the monitoring level is very important, because what sounds great loud might actually sound totally thin and lacking any body at a very low level.
Thanks for letting us stop by. Can we step
You're
into your
very welcome.
studio and see what you're doing in there?
Exactly, let's do it.
All right, cool.
All right, so yeah, now we are on the other side of the glass into the Foley area. And I'm going to go through a little bit of everything and the way it's set up. So the first thing you notice is all those different boxes here that all represent a different surface. Of course, it's hard to cover every single surface that you will encounter in a movie, but it's all those 6 boxes basically kind of cover, I would say, 95% of what I always need. So here, for example, you'll see you have plastic tiles that will be really used into schools, hospital, all those kind of places. Then you would have here kind of a multi-function surface that will be used for dirt. And so here's the dirt, but you can also easily just add some magnetic tape on top of it to kind of make it sound more like grass all of a sudden. Or, of course, if it's a pretty rocky place, I can move to that section here. And I have a variation of the sound. Then this area here is also kind of multi-purpose. Right now it's set up with some gravel. But if I swipe it under, I have also asphalt that is great for all the outdoor street recordings. But yeah, right now here is our gravel. And you can see how here I kind of demonstrate the heel toe thing I was talking about, which defines the speed. So let's say, for example, if you want to run, that's kind of how it would work. Or working very slow. And you see how you have to kind of put a lot of weight into the footsteps, just so, again, they sound bigger than life and you get that body out of it. It gets very quickly dusty, as you can see, so that's one of the parts you have to deal with on a constant basis. But other than that, it's a pretty fun, I like to call it's pretty fun to play in a sand box at 35-year-old, Right now it's set up with a wood platform that is hollow in the bottom, so it allows to get some pretty deep wood-sounding platforms. But could be, of course, very easily converted to some more like finished wood surface by adding a piece of laminated flooring on top of it. So this one has a more sleek sounding sound to it, so that would be good for inside a house, whereas the other one would be good, for example, a wood porch or something like this. Then over there we have another surface that would be for tile, or carpet on top of tile like it's set up right now. So here is our carpet sound, and of course, if I remove the carpet, then here is again another variation on wood. That is a little bit more of a hardwood situation, like not as resonant as the other one. The room is treated with different absorption materials just to make sure that it still sounds live. Because like I mentioned, you don't want the sound to be also too dampened and lose the natural of it. But it's important also to not have any like weird reflections in your sound, so it doesn't sound interior per se. You know, we don't want it to sound like it's recorded in a room or a car, exactly. And of course, as you can see, I also have a set of curtains on each side for more extreme situation where I really need to have more of a dry sound. I can always draw the curtains, and that will help cutting the resonance of the room outside. So, and now here, welcome to all the props collection. So you see it goes from an IV stand to anything like a old school phone. Here is like all the gun options, handcuffs, some belts. So yeah, you really need to have everything kind of organized in a way that, of course, you're not going to spend 10 minutes to find everything, which is the challenge because obviously it's a lot of stuff. So you have to find what works for you, you know, in terms of categories. Here is all my remotes and flashlights and stuff. Here would be all the medical pill bottles. What else? Here is all like chains and various tubes, cell phones, where of course you need to get like a bunch of different ones to match what you have, being an iPhone or more of a traditional push button phone. Flip phones. Here is one of my favorite categories too. It's all the door knobs and hinges. Hinges that are a great tool to create all kind of and this is part of the trial part of things, you know, where you just got to try, see how it works and kind of try it again and try different combinations until you find something that works. Now I'm going to grab this piece of metal. And let's say, you know, like this hinges by itself is kind of, you know, of course it's thin sounding, it's not attached to anything, but all of a sudden, if you just like couple it with a piece of sheet metal, you get the illusion of a fence or some, you know, you can get more, yeah, it's really a combination of elements together that will help you to recreate that sound. Or you can also layer that piece of metal on top of the wood platform that is kind of hollow sounding, so it's going to help to add some resonance to the sound. And then that way, you know, you can have some heavier sounding hinges, movements, or like a heavy metal door that might work for it. Or if you want even more resonance, of course, you can just kind of hold it a little in contact still with the platform, but not touching it everywhere. So here would be kind of a dogs is another part. Like I just finished a movie that is full of dogs running everywhere. So you might be wondering, how do you record dog footsteps? One of the best way I've found out is to use those gloves that, as you can see, I glued some metal pieces at the end of them. So that works for the nail of the dog paws. One thing pretty interesting to know about dogs is that they never put 2 feet together at the same time. So in order to get like a realistic dog walking, you need to also understand that, meaning like don't put 2 paws at the same time because they can't do that. So yeah, the way to kind of recreate that, the illusion of this sound would be by wearing those gloves. Yeah, that's how you would do a dog, pretty much. Simple as that. The one thing to be sure, of course, like I say, is to never have like 2 legs at the same time, and also to not make it too clean sounding. So I kind of try to delay the fingers a little bit so it gives a little flat to it, a little. And you can balance like between the tip and the leathery part, if you want to have more of the leather, of course, you'll put your hands flatter. Or more of the nail. So yeah, we're gonna record some leather jacket movement for this character. So what I ended up choosing is that leather jacket. But one very important thing is to always check the production sound to make sure that it sounds close enough that it's gonna blend well together. And I noticed that he had kind of a high-pitchy sound to it. So that's why just the leather jacket was a little too missing, that high-pitch leather stress sound. So I ended up using that leather jacket plus this little leather purse that help in getting more of the Yeah, I hope we get enough. Yeah, that should be. And
then without.
Yeah, you can see how this one is kind of hard to.
That's a big difference.
The jacket is there to make sure the size is right, that it sounds big enough. And the little leather bag is really here because it's easier to control and also adds this high pitch element that is needed to match production sound here. Well, first of all, if possible, to watch the movie before. But that's, like I say, if possible, which is rarely the case. Because if you would take the time to watch everything, of course, the time you would take to get it done would just exponentially be longer. So it's really good to just kind of learn how to slightly either anticipate what's going to happen just by really paying attention to the actor body language, or, which is what I tend to do, always try to keep a consistent offset. So meaning, kind of doing everything slightly after, but in a consistent way. So that then, you can just bring your recording back a couple frames and it will be perfectly in sync. Or at least very close, and you can then just tweak in the editing process.
Puts his hands in, the thing lights up.
Right.
Okay. Lots of leather, lots of arms.
Looks like this is it.
And how far would you go in a take?
Usually the leather is more of a pass. So meaning, if I do a good job, we can let it roll all the way. it really just depends, if there is sometimes there is parts that are hard to predict. Like I remember, for example, a scene after that where there is a power outage and they walk in the dark. So this is something that if you don't listen to production and notice that they are actually already walking, you would miss. So things like that, where whenever it's not predictable, I would have to just punch that specific spot. But most of the time, yeah, it's always good to try to have a consistent take. One good way to get like very squishy and disgusting sound, like blood sound or anything, where you need kind of that very thick, liquid, squishy sound, air gel, that works really well. It's actually one of the best thing I found to do all those sounds, because it adds really this thickness to it that you wouldn't get with just like water or anything. So for example, in this short film, in the Outpost short film, at some point you have the alien entity that shows up, and it's that very watery, slimy, liquid-like, it nearly looks like liquid metal kind of texture. And so I ended up thinking that, yeah, using a layer with that air gel, that I ended up also pitching down like an octave to kind of give it a more a deeper sound to it, layered with the original, of course. That I think worked out pretty well, on top of course, what's been done in sound design to add to it. But then when it comes to the stab, you need something a little more like crunchy, bony to it, which an orange is perfect for that, because you get that squishiness, plus with the skin you can get some pretty bony sound to it. Not the greatest take, but
just slide it around.
yeah.
That's amazing.
Even if you're stuck.